Hello, Flavio speaking. Here, let's see whether we can survive this corona crisis and see whether we manage to have our discussions online and submit the necessary work to go forward within our subject. So the first thing that I would like to try today is the use of PowerPoint, where I can actually explain the PowerPoint and you can actually move forward by studying some issues on your own and see whether later we can have even some discussion. So I plan to use Microsoft Teams later, but first to give you enough material for studying, reading, and see whether we leave that only for discussion. So let's start with the notion of discrimination when we talk about hiring practices. That's the most important thing. But of course, talking about discrimination means that we have to adapt this word and the concept to what we mean by discrimination within corporate social responsibility, because the idea of discriminating is not something bad per se. It means judgment. It means that people are able to choose things. But here, the meaning is different. Here, it's about doing something wrong, doing something on the basis of prejudice or stereotypes. And it's not only that someone would do something wrong, but it's that this might have a negative impact on the interests of another person. In this case, we are talking about employees in a firm, but we can see discrimination everywhere in society. So keep in mind that the core thing, the initial thing, is the notion of discrimination. This originally would be a morally neutral term, but as we are using here, it means that people are doing something bad. So they are um, talking about the merit of someone, not based on his or her individual features, but based on prejudice, based on stereotype. And then we can see that there's a wide range of discrimination. We can see that that includes some of the most traditional forms of discrimination, such as gender, race, or age. But it might also include some other forms of discrimination, such as the place where you live, the street where you live, your neighborhood, or even later when these days employers they request your social network links. They might discriminate you because of the kind of things you post, or they might even discriminate you because of the way you speak, your accent, or your tone, or your pitch, or even any other feature that might be a physical feature that you might have. So there are different kinds of discrimination. The problem with discrimination is that all those features they might not tell anything relevant about who you are. But anyway, you would assume that people with certain features they would behave and they would be um, different from others in certain negative ways. So always the notion of discrimination would imply that. Now I hope this point. Now I would like you now, if possible, to stop uh, this PowerPoint, and if you type TED, Tolstoy Miller, unconscious bias, you can see this video. Now, this is something that we should discuss later. So I hope that we have an opportunity using Microsoft Teams later to talk about this video because it's very interesting. Quite often we think that, oh, this big criteria of discrimination, you could say, of yourself, no, but I don't discriminate women, I respect women. And then you can see that sometimes there are minor criteria, which is the whole idea of the unconscious bias, that we might be unaware that we are using this kind of criteria in order to discriminate people. And here she talks about stereotypes that apply especially when companies are hiring. So um, stop now, and then see when we come back, when you come back, let's see the continuation of the discussion. Okay, now I hope that you have watched the video first. If you didn't do that, please do it now. And hope now you have watched the video. So you have a very good case about the subtleties, the complexities involved in discriminating people. Let's see whether you would discriminate people later in the continuation of this. Now, the question is that all these discriminatory practices, they are so widespread. They can start, as in the case of the video, with recruitment practices, the way that people are screening. But then, once you are inside a company, the difficulty is that they might affect the way you are chosen for promotion or not. And they might even affect the kind of employment you have. So the conditions of your employment, the conditions of your contract might be part of it. Till the very end, till the way that companies decide to fire you, to discharge you. They might offer you positive conditions for that, or they might offer you, depending on the kind of contract you have, some very hostile negative conditions. So the discriminatory practices, they go throughout the employment life of someone. And it's important for a question of fairness that companies, they keep transparent and clear policies about how they engage with their employees. So it matters when we think about yourselves now, when we are hired. It matters later about how we are promoted if we spend some time, I don't know, 5, 10 years plus, as it used to be, in terms of promotions. And then the conditions, your actually employment conditions, and whether while working hours are flexible or not. Now, especially these days, we can see how different people, they have more flexibility in their work or not, and that goes to the end. Yeah. So I hope this is clear. There are so many conditions. Now, one of the difficulties, if we only talk about universities, is that we have a much lower percentage of your lecturers who are, especially female lecturers, who are promoted to the chair or of the subjects. And this is not simply in Spain, this is everywhere in the world. So discrimination might be very subtle. Sometimes women professors, they are called by their first name, and male professors, they are called by their surnames. So there's so much that people have noticed that relates to discrimination. Now, of course, there are things that are much harder, such as sexual harassment. And the question of sexual harassment, think about the definition of discrimination. It's not about what people who discriminate, in this case, people who would harass, is what they do. Yeah. And you can read here kind of things a man would do. But it's about the negative impact on women, is how people can go from feeling uncomfortable, going into depression and even collapsing. So these issues, they have to be taken very seriously. companies, they do need protocols. Um, Managers, they do need to implement those protocols. This is not simply a question about being nice, this is about a question of fairness within the workplace. And this is one of the extremes, the question of harassment. Now, the International Labour Organization has a typification of all kinds of verbal, physical acts that would be included as part of sexual harassment. It can start with things which are very innocent. You could say they are very innocent, such as joking or teasing, or then a kind of invitation to dinner, or and that can move on and on. Going to the latest, you can see in this list, or the last in this list, which is forced sexual intercourse. Of course, in this case, this would be a crime and would be illegal. But then you have a range of acts with a sexual nature. And the question is that sometimes even those considered mild, they can harm, they can actually be very bad, not simply for the workplace per se, but for the person who are the victims. Now, you could say that this, oh, but this is something which is in theory. Not really. European surveys have found that between 40 to 50% of women in the European Union report some form of sexual harassment or unwanted sexual behavior in the workplace. So this is huge. This means that almost half of women within the European Union suffer from that. And this is not a small number. So we should say that this is a very serious problem. It's something that hopefully not, but some of you might see and might even have to face and think about that in your own personal life. So again, hope not. But considering that not many women are working compared to men, which is the figure you can see below, but that is half of this number. So this is huge. This is a huge social problem, and we are talking about the European Union. We are not talking about other places in the world which still have to develop to get to the levels of the European Union. So this is a very problem. And at the other end, we have the question of the difficulty of women being promoted as managers and leaders and CEO. So it's still the world of big business is a world dominated by men in general, and there's a lot that should be done. So the questions of discrimination, although we talk more about gender issues, they're the ones we have the figures, we have the numbers, we have the statistics, we know what to do. So this is still something which can be very pervasive for all those criteria at the very beginning that could give grounds for discrimination. So here we are not simply talking about gender. We have figures for gender, but you should be aware that we are talking about all those kinds of discrimination that would be comprised by the list that we saw. Yeah. Now, this is not simply about promotions. This is about pay gaps. So 20% is the average gender pay gap, but depending on the other circumstances, this can be even higher. We have mentioned in class that the percentage of women working on STEM professions, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, is actually around 20%. So many professions that would require that kind of background, they would be more male dominated and they are highly paid than others. We also know that when women they have children, the probability that they will become a manager actually decreases. You can compare that with the figures you see below. So it's good having children is good for men, but it's bad for women. in the workplace, and is for the whole career path that this inequality remains. Now, when we talk about workers' rights, this is a much broader agenda which involves contracts and payment and holiday pay and sick pay and parental rights and flexible working. These are actually the main criteria involved when we talk about rights. And this is such a huge problem today, especially after the 2008 recession, or world crisis, world financial crisis, if you prefer, because all those people who are still unemployed, they are working with rubbish contracts. They have no rights. Even now, in the middle of this coronavirus crisis, you can see how many people they will have no kind of rights or payments during the time that they will not be able to work, whereas some people are enjoying some flexibility in exercising their work, as I am now. I'm working with the flexibility of staying at home, and well, you too, to a certain extent. So other people will have to get crowded underground or bus because they have to go to work and they have to go to work. So the question of rights is really a question of citizens' dignity, but it's also a question about working arrangements and workers' rights, which are very important for this group of stakeholders, one could say, but it's important to societies as a whole. It's a question of civility. Now, um, we are on for 17 minutes, and if you have watched that video much more, for half an hour, so and that's the maximum that we'll push. But for today, I would like to ask you, and that's going to be an exercise on Moodle. It should take 10 minutes for you to actually do this test. Is the gender career. There are many tests there. The Harvard test. I'm going to put on Moodle the link for you to see. So the idea is that you go there, you test, concentrate when you do the test. Don't do any other things. It's important for the outcome of the test that you dedicate fully this 10 minutes for the test. So write what they ask, go to the end, and you are going to see that at the very end, they will tell you the result of the test. So I'd like you to take a print screen or a photo of your result, open a Word document, and discuss what's the meaning of that result to you. Yeah, and that's an activity to be submitted at the end of the class today. So should you have any questions, please do write to